In 2009, the Scottish government released 11 beavers into a dying river system. No engineers, no public construction budget, no blueprints. Within 5 years, those 11 animals had built a network of dams that reduced flood peaks by up to 60%, retained 24 million liters of water, and filtered agricultural toxins out of the water supply more effectively than some treatment plants costing millions to build. Humanity has spent centuries pouring concrete to control rivers. Billions of dollars. Some of the most advanced flood modeling software ever developed. 11 rodents did something different overnight, using mud, branches, and an instinct that hadn't been allowed to operate in Scotland for 400 years. This is the story of what happened when scientists finally let them try. If you think the most sophisticated solutions always come from human engineering, subscribe and stay here, because this story might change your mind completely. By 1900, not a single beaver remained in Scotland. Across Europe and Asia combined, a species that had once numbered in the hundreds of millions had been reduced to roughly 100 individuals. The cause was economic. Beaver fur was valuable. Beaver meat was eaten. And castoreum, a substance secreted from the beaver's scent glands, was prized by perfume makers and medical practitioners of the era, commanding prices comparable to gold. By the end of the 15th century, Scotland's last beaver had disappeared entirely. What followed wasn't simply the loss of one species. It was the slow collapse of an entire hydrological system across the region. Without beaver dams to slow and redirect water flow, streams straightened into fast, violent channels. Heavy rainfall had nothing left to absorb its force water rushed downstream at maximum velocity, eroding riverbanks, stripping away fertile soil, and flooding settlements with no buffer left to soften the impact. During droughts, the opposite problem emerged. The extensive wetlands that beavers had once maintained functioning as natural sponges holding water through dry periods had dried out completely. Without them, land cracked within weeks of reduced rainfall, and the thousands of bird, fish, and insect species dependent on those wetlands disappeared along with the habitat itself. Human engineers tried to compensate with concrete levees and progressively deeper dredged channels. Billions of dollars went into this approach over the following centuries. Floods kept getting worse anyway. The fundamental error, it turned out, wasn't a lack of engineering effort. It was trying to control water, when what the landscape actually needed was something to slow it down. In May 2009, after sustained pressure from scientists, the Scottish government approved the country's first mammal reintroduction project. 11 beavers from Norway were released into a 44 square kilometer forest area in Napdale. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was structured as a closely monitored biological experiment, with a built-in exit clause if the beavers damaged farmland, flooded roads, or harmed fish populations. The government reserved the right to remove or relocate them immediately. Hydrologists from leading universities equipped the forest with flow meters, water pressure sensors, infrared trail cameras, and chemical analysis instruments. Every felled branch and every rising puddle was logged in real time. On the first night, under light rain, the beavers began working. The trigger is encoded in their biology, a response to the sound of flowing water, which beavers interpret as a structural breach that needs sealing. They felled young trees with their powerful jaws, dragged the branches into the stream, and packed mud and stones into the gaps. No blueprints, no planning meetings, no machinery. Within 1 year, a single straight stream had been transformed into a complex network of dozens of interconnected dams and ponds. And just as the system began expanding, a serious threat to the entire project emerged, one that could have ended it before the data had a chance to prove anything. Atlantic salmon are the economic and ecological backbone of the Napdale region. Adult salmon must swim upstream to spawn, and the immediate concern from authorities and local fishermen was straightforward. How does a salmon get past a wall of branches and mud more than a meter high? If beaver dams blocked salmon migration routes, the entire reintroduction would have been judged a failure regardless of its other benefits. The data told a different story. Beaver dams are not solid concrete barriers, they're porous structures that allow water through continuously. During migration season, heavy rainfall raises water levels above the dam crest, creating natural water steps that adult salmon can leap across without difficulty. The more significant finding involved juvenile salmon. Underwater cameras and observation studies showed that the calm ponds forming behind beaver dams had become exceptional nursery habitat. Rather than being swept downstream by fast currents or exhausted fighting the flow, young salmon had access to deep, nutrient-rich, sheltered pools to grow in. Size and survival rates among juvenile salmon in beaver-modified territory increased measurably. The 4-century absence of beavers, researchers concluded, had likely been actively harming salmon populations rather than protecting them. And the salmon finding wasn't the only surprise in the water itself. Chemical analysis teams monitoring the Napdale ponds reported something unexpected. Water exiting the beaver dam system was significantly cleaner than water entering it. The mechanism is straightforward once you understand what slow-moving water does. As water passes through a beaver pond, its velocity drops dramatically. Sediment, agricultural nitrates, and phosphorus runoff settle out at the bottom rather than continuing downstream toward the sea. Bacteria living in the accumulated mud layer then break down toxic chemical compounds trapped in that sediment. Water quality reports from the project documented the scale of this effect. Nitrate concentrations from agricultural fertilizer dropped by up to 40%, while phosphorus levels fell by nearly 50% after passing through the beaver dam system. For comparison, an artificial wastewater treatment facility with equivalent filtration capacity would cost a government at minimum $5 million to construct, plus hundreds of thousands of dollars annually in operating costs. The beavers were doing it for free, in exchange for a steady supply of willow branches. By the 5th year of the Napdale experiment, researchers from the University of Exeter compared the real-world flood data against the most advanced computer flood prediction models available at the time. The results required engineers to revise existing assumptions. During a major storm event, instead of a single destructive volume of water rushing downstream all at once, the chain of beaver dams broke up and dissipated that energy progressively. Water overflowing the first dam lost approximately 10% of its force. The second dam absorbed another 15%. By the time floodwater had passed through a full chain of roughly 10 dams, the original flood peak had been reduced by as much as 60%. Drone imagery over one section of the monitored area showed beaver dams retaining up to 24 million liters of floodwater water that spread laterally across both riverbanks and infiltrated into the soil, recharging underground aquifers that had been depleted for generations. And the benefits didn't stop at flood control. What researchers found next changed how scientists think about beavers and climate resilience entirely. If this is reshaping how you think about ecological engineering, share this video, because what beavers are doing during wildfires is even more remarkable than the flood data. During extreme heat events and large-scale wildfires across North America, satellite imagery captured a pattern that eco-hydrologists hadn't fully anticipated. Dr. Emily Fairfax, a leading researcher in this field, published satellite analysis of some of the most destructive wildfires on record. Across tens of thousands of hectares reduced to white ash, areas managed by beaver dam systems remained green, functioning as emerald-colored refuges in the middle of the burn zone. In these beaver-maintained wetlands, vegetation survival rates reached as high as 80%, compared to near-total destruction in surrounding unmanaged terrain. These pockets didn't just survive the fire themselves, they slowed its advance and served as refuge zones for wildlife fleeing the flames, from deer to rare bird species. The underlying mechanism is the same groundwater retention capacity that drives the flood control benefit. Beaver wetlands hold water so effectively that even during severe droughts, they retain enough moisture to resist burning under conditions that destroy everything around them. There's a secondary effect tied to carbon storage. The flooded mud layer behind beaver dams traps decaying wood, root systems, and fallen leaves before they can fully decompose into carbon dioxide. Instead, that organic material becomes locked into the saturated mud, meaning beaver wetlands function without any deliberate design, as functioning carbon sinks. When economists calculated what it would cost governments to replicate beaver-level flood reduction using artificial infrastructure, the comparison became almost absurd. Building a reservoir system with equivalent flood reduction capacity would require tens of millions of dollars in concrete, steel, land acquisition, and ongoing annual maintenance. Concrete infrastructure degrades over time, it cracks, requires constant inspection, and eventually needs full reconstruction. Beaver-built systems repair themselves. When a storm destroys a dam, the colony frequently rebuilds an improved version within 3 days, at zero maintenance cost to anyone. The data was conclusive enough that in November 2016, the Scottish government formally declared that the Napdale beavers would be permitted to remain permanently. The experiment had succeeded on every metric it was designed to test. While researchers were closely monitoring the 11 beavers at Napdale, something else was happening elsewhere in Scotland entirely outside the official program. Beavers that had escaped from captivity, bred independently, or been quietly released by environmental activists, had established a second, unmonitored population in the Tayside region. A nationwide survey found the population had grown from roughly 150 individuals in 2012 to more than 2,500 by 2026, occupying and reshaping hundreds of kilometers of river systems across the country. In May 2019, the Scottish Parliament passed legislation granting beavers strict legal protection, placing them on equal legal footing with dolphins and eagles. Hunting them or destroying their dams without authorization now carries significant legal penalties. The model has since spread internationally. The United Kingdom recently announced plans to allow wild beaver releases nationwide. In arid U.S. states, including California and Utah, authorities are using helicopters to relocate beavers into drought-affected remote regions, specifically to rebuild wetland water retention. In Bavaria, Germany, beaver-built wetlands have already saved local communities millions of euros in flood cleanup costs, where beaver activity conflicts with agriculture-flooded fields. Gnawed orchard trees engineers have developed beaver deceivers, underground pipe systems designed to quietly drain water from a dam without triggering the construction instinct that would otherwise prompt the beavers to seal the leak immediately. It represents a genuine shift, technology designed to cooperate with the species rather than remove it. Compensation programs for affected farmers exist, and governments now budget for flow control installations as part of accommodating beaver expansion. It's not a frictionless solution, but weighed against the flood, drought, and water quality benefits documented at Napdale and beyond, most of the affected governments have judged it worth the cost. After 4 centuries of relying almost exclusively on concrete and mechanical force to manage water, the most effective system measured by Exeter's researchers wasn't engineered by a single human team. It was built overnight by 11 animals doing exactly what their biology has trained them to do for millions of years. Sometimes the best engineering isn't building higher walls. It's stepping back and letting something else do the work it already knows how to do.